To Deputy Brid Smith.
On a similar vein, Taoiseach, I want to put it to you that the government's strategy on pay is now beginning to unravel. And your strategy was originally to isolate the teachers in the ASTI who did not agree to the Lansdowne Road agreement. They overwhelmingly rejected the conditions of Lansdowne Road. You then went and did separate deals with the other teachers' unions where there was malcontent, and indeed with the Gardaí, who by a huge majority have rejected the outcome of that deal. So your strategy to isolate the ASTI is unravelling for you. But more importantly, I think I would like to ask you, is your strategy not aimed at trying to put manners on all workers to try and stop the contagion that is spreading, not just through the public sector, but will also spread through the private sector? Particularly, Taoiseach, when you look at the lousy 10 cents on the hour recommendation from the Low Pay Commission towards the minimum wage. How in the name of God could an economy that's in recovery offer that to 20% of our population who work on that sort of pay as some kind of an offer? And I think this government is worried about the spread of contagion that has gone from Lewis to Dublin Bus, where pay rises that went beyond what were being offered have been successful. And I welcome the fact that the Gardaí and the teachers are standing outside that process and demanding justice, because it's worth reminding the House that the FEMPI legislation, which was brought in by the previous Speaker originally, has reduced the pay of public sector workers by a huge amount, insofar as over 230,000 public sector workers who earn less than 60,000, the vast majority earning less than 40,000 a year, have year on year for 5 years lost 27,000 in total for each worker. That is a huge cut and a huge loss to those public sector workers in order to bail out the banks. And indeed, Taoiseach, I think we should remind ourselves in this House, when we're talking in terms of pay and pay increases, what money we are on, what money you are on, what money other ministers are on, and think about how we compare and how we look to others. I want to give a special mention to the nurses, because in a hospital today you could have 3 nurses working alongside each other doing the same job and on 3 different rates of pay. Imagine how they feel, how demoralised, how annoyed, how seriously angry they are with this state, who then have to deal with a creaking health service that can't even deliver sufficient beds to the population. You cannot even get the nurses who we qualify to stay in Ireland. 5,500 out of 7,000 of them have emigrated in the last few years, and you have a failed Bring Them Back Home campaign that did nothing to alleviate that problem. And they will continue to emigrate for very logical reasons, because they cannot afford to rent or to buy in any of the cities in this country and find it very, very difficult to rear their families. So I want you to answer me how you perceive your policy on public sector pay can continue in this vein without seriously considering repealing the FEMPI legislation, which goes to the heart of all of these issues.
Well, as pointed out in a question from Deputy Howlin, obviously the Government are very anxious that the mechanisms of the state would be used and used well to encourage people to engage in there and deal with matters where industrial action either has taken place, is threatened or is a cause of concern. That's what these mechanisms are for. And Lansdowne Road, within the Public Pay Service Agreement, is the area that Government believe can deal with the vast majority of these. As you know, 2 teacher unions have accepted. The AGSI is outside that fold at the moment. I'm glad and happy that the AGSI and the GRA have agreed to meet with the Minister for Justice. They will find the Minister very attentive to their particular problems, and I do hope that, arising from those discussions, that matter can proceed forward. The Low Pay Commission, for your information, was set up with a particular purpose in mind: to be objective, to be independent, to declare to Government what, in their view, would be an appropriate rise for low-paid employees in respect of the minimum wage. That's the reason it was set up, and the Government followed suit on after it being set up in implementing the recommendation of the Commission. There are people who are not under the diktat of government, as you seem to point out. I'd also say to you that the situation insofar as health is concerned, with a budget of over 14.5 billion now, the HSE offer permanent contracts to young nurses coming out, permanent employment to nurses who have been on temporary employment, and the discussions are going on in respect of the incremental rights of those nurses who were graduates for a number of years and did not receive those rights. The Minister for Health has already spoken to the Minister for Public Expenditure, and we hope that that matter too can be resolved.
Deputy Smith.
Just to take up your first point, first of all, I think that to say that, your second point on the Low Pay Commission, to say that you're a group of people who are objective and independent who came up with 10 cents an hour, I think it'd be interesting if we looked at the membership of that commission to see how much they're getting paid hourly for starters, because that doesn't make them objective or independent if they're getting a hell of a lot more money, which I suspect they were. Secondly, you're not going to be able to recruit the nurses. You just aren't. As long as the FEMPI legislation remains in place and you do not deal with nurses' pay, we're not going to have the beds opened up in hospitals that we need. And I want to argue that there are measures we could take which could repeal the FEMPI legislation with a cost of 2.1 billion to the state. First of all, we could close off the tax loopholes to people like REITs, vulture funds, other financial institutions. We could take away the sort of tax breaks and loopholes that we allow them. And secondly, when you think about it, if workers to regain that pay, they would be paying more than half of it probably back in tax and PRSI to the state, and they would spend the other half. It wouldn't be hived off into tax havens and offshore accounts. Workers actually spend in the economy, so there's a net gain to all, both in terms of morale, recruitment, fulfilling the services of this state and returning the money to where it belongs, and stop protecting the very wealthy but give it back to workers who deserve it in abundance.
Thank you. Taoiseach, 1 minute.
Well, I repeat again for you, the Low Pay Commission is comprised of people who have not, who are not being dictated to by government, saying this is what you must do. They have terms of reference to look at what might be an appropriate increase in the minimum wage for low-paid workers, and they proceed and do that completely independently and objectively. And you don't seem to want to accept that, but that's the fact. They are not dictated to by government, nor should they be, and they wouldn't be operating as an independent entity if that were so. There's been an increase of 1,163 nurses employed in the public health service. It's 35,712 now from August 2014 to August 2016. The numbers had fallen by 4,000 from 2007 to 2014. I've pointed out to you that the matter of the incremental credit for the 36-week clinical placement undertaken by fourth-year student nurses was abolished by the government in office back in December 2010 as part of a number of measures to reduce public service pay bills. And previously on taking up employment with the HSE, nurses following graduation would go on to the second point of the scale after 16 weeks. Recommendation has been made that that should be paid, and the two ministers are speaking about that matter.